call the meeting to order. We are reconvening from December 6, 2022 meeting. Mr. Crumpler.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. One of the requirements of the County Board of Commissioners is to provide adequate housing for those persons charged with a crime while awaiting trial. Our current facility has served for a jail for more than 30 years, while the county intends to use this facility in the future for additional office space, thus extending its useful life as a building. Its time as a maximum security jail is coming to an end. I'm always amazed at how our maintenance staff have maintained the current jail to make it last this long. However, due to the way it was designed, its technical function, and the fact that it was built in a time before a modern electronics, modern surveillance, and the internet and the IT infrastructure requirements, it's impossible to financially renovate the existing facility back into a modern jail facility. Due to the conditions of our existing facility and the limitations on renovations for use as a continued jail, it's come time for the Board of Commissioners to consider a new, more modern jail facility, one that will operate with modern technology and will be a safer place for the staff and the occupants that reside there. With those task orders handed to the staff, a new jail facility has been designed, engineered, surveyed, and bid out. And the Board of Commissioners are here today. We're asking for you to consider the bids we have received and are seeking the directives to move forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Noel and Ryan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
On November the 1st, bid documents were sent out to 4 pre-qualified firms: Bordeaux Construction, Daniels & Daniels, HG Reynolds, and TA Loving. Bids were due back on November the 29th at 2 p.m. 2 of the 4 pre-qualified vendors requested we postpone the bid opening to give the contractors ample time to receive bids from their subcontractors due to the Thanksgiving Day holiday. We moved the bid opening to December the 8th at 2 p.m. 3 of the 4 vendors submitted bid packets for the Wayne County Detention Center project: Bordeaux Construction, Daniels & Daniels, and TA Loving. Mosley Architects has qualified all the bids, and it appears that TA Loving Company is the apparent low bidder based on the total base bid amount. The lowest bidder for the alternate 1 and alternate 2 is Daniels & Daniels. The bid tab is attached for your review and recommendation. I'll open it up to Ryan and myself if you have any questions.
I got one for Chip. Does Kendall need to be here?
Not necessarily.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion. Make a motion that we approve the low bidder for the base bid of TA Loving.
I have a motion on the floor to award the low bid to TA Loving.
I got a comment. Is that base bid with allowances?
Yes, sir.
Base bid with allowances? Okay.
Yes, base bid with allowances.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a consensus to award the bid to TA Loving, base amount with allowances? Do I have them? Raise your hand, please. Do I have anyone who looks like it's carried, Madam Chair?
Thank you.
I would like to introduce the next item on the agenda is going to be financing options for the jail expansion project by Ted Cole from Davenport. Good to see you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think everybody's got the handout that we put together.
We warmed it up.
Warmed it up, thank you. So, sort of parallel to the bidding of the project for construction, we have been working with staff to organize the financing part of this project. We put a request for proposal together and shared that with a number of banks. And if you look in the booklet, there are page numbers in the lower right-hand corner. We received proposals from 5 different lenders. Some of these names you all will recognize, not necessarily all of them, but they all are regular bidders of municipal loans like this. We deal with all of them on a pretty regular basis. We had requested an RFP for both 15 and 20-year terms. You will see that there's some color coding going on here on page 2. Some of these banks, because of the volatility in the interest rates, were not able to give us a fixed rate when they submitted their proposal. They said, we're going to float with one index or another until you get to a place where you can tell us you want to move forward with us, XYZ Bank. So for example, Capital One, in that column B, there's a lot of language about how their interest rate will float until it's locked in. But at the time of their proposal under column C, their rate for a 20-year term was 5.05%. And on column D, it was non-callable for roughly the first 10 years. In other words, you couldn't prepay it or refund it for a 10-year period. So the rate wasn't particularly attractive, and that those call provisions, the non-prepayment period was a little bit longer than the other banks. JP Morgan, the next bank that proposed, you'll see there's a footnote 1. They capped the term of the loan to 15 years. In all of our planning work with you all, where we look at this project, but we look at DSS Health and other things, we had been identifying a 20-year payback for this particular project. So JP Morgan was limited to 15 years. That is at least partially why those rates under column C for them are lower. They're in red. They're not fixed until we're able to lock this in. But again, it's a 15-year term, and as we get into the latter part of this book, I think what we're going to find is the 15-year payback is a little bit higher annual payment than what we were comfortable taking on in the context of the bigger financial plan, and I'll cover that for you. TD Bank, they were not able to lock in the rate when their proposal was provided, but they also provided an index that we could track, and they would be willing to lock the rate as soon as the board were to take action to approve them as the lender, which you could potentially do today. One of the things that we're asking for today is to get some direction from you all on the financing approach. And if we want to do a bank financing, we'll be asking you to give us some direction on that. So if you were to choose TD Bank, they could lock the rate today. I would note a couple of things. They have a little bit of a longer no prepayment period that goes out to 2030 or 2033 there under column D. And I'm going to cover these banks a little bit further in a moment. Truist Bank was more of what we expected in terms of a very clean proposal. That's the old BB&T and SunTrust merged for Truist. Their rate is fixed. It was fixed when they submitted their proposal at a 3.79. That's for 20 years. They do allow prepayment starting immediately, and if it's a 20-year loan, for the first half of the loan, there would be a 1% penalty to prepay it, and for the second half of the loan, there would be no penalty to prepay it. So you do have the ability to prepay it or refund it if we ever have a reason to do that, but for the first half of the loan, there would be a 1% penalty to do that.
Okay. What's the chances of us prepaying in the first 10 years?
You know, it would likely only be if rates fall, and because we're in a little bit of a higher rate environment, as I suspect you all know, than we were a year ago. If rates were to, in that period, come back down, we may find that there's an opportunity to refund it for savings. So it wouldn't necessarily be that you would prepay it with cash out of pocket, but there may be an opportunity to refund it in the first 10 years. If, when, and to what extent the benefit would be, we don't know, but it's possible.
So, if I could, in comparing with TD Bank, basically their prepayment would kick in at, 8 years?
Approximately 8 years, that's right.
And their prepayment penalty is at 1%?
No, TD's has no penalty.
It has no penalty.
No penalty. Now, you can't do anything for the first 8 or so years, but then after that period, you can prepay it without a penalty. And Truist, after 10 years, you can prepay it without a penalty.
But what's the penalty on TD if you prepay, you can't prepay at all?
You can't.
Oh, you cannot prepay?
Yeah,
For the
you have,
first 8 years, you cannot do anything.
that's right.
7 years.
It's non-callable.
But after then, there is no penalty.
Correct.
Or 7 years, yeah.
Yeah, starting in February 1 of 2030, and they gave us another option that the prepayment would be allowed starting in February 1 of 33. So they just gave 2 options. And you can see there's a little bit of a difference in the rate. The longer the no prepayment period, the lower the rate. So the 362 rate that they gave us, that corresponds to the option 2 where you cannot prepay the loan until 2033. So with Truist, you can prepay the loan in the first 10 years, but you have a 1% penalty. After 10 years, you have no penalty. So they're very similar in that regard after 10 years.
And that 1% is just based on the total dollars that you prepaid, not?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And that's $10,000 per million. So
Right.
it's not an insignificant amount on what could be a 40-some million dollar project. But you do have the ability to do it, and then again, after 10 years, you can do it at what we call PAR, P-A-R, with no penalty.
We've done other financing with Truist,
Yeah.
and have they generally always put in this 1% penalty?
For the first half of the loan term, yes, sir.
They generally have.
That's correct. That's correct.
Was there any discussion with them possibly to reduce that?
We always ask, and they say this is our standard language. So it was asked and
Okay.
nicely said, this is what we want to propose.
Well, as long as we ask.
We
I mean,
asked.
You know,
We did ask.
thank you.
And I'm going to come back to a little more detail here because there's a couple other data points that we would need to understand. And then finally, Webster Bank lines up a little bit more with Truist Bank in that their rate was fixed when they submitted the proposal at a 407. It's not prepayable for the first 5 years. And then it is prepayable with a 1% penalty in years 6 through 8 with no penalty after year 8. Okay? So go to the next page. We focused a little more on JP Morgan, TD, and Truist, and we added a number of things. And I'll kind of walk down the Truist proposal, but you can kind of look at what the other banks were doing. The interest rate is the first line item. We kind of covered that on the prior page. The term on line 2, both TD and Truist had 20-year terms. JP Morgan was only out 15 years. Prepayment language on line 3, we've covered that. Acceptance and rate expiration. So for example, with Truist Bank, they don't have an acceptance deadline. Although if we are able to leave here today and with any direction on what bank we'd like to use, we will let that bank know. But they would require us to close by mid-February, February 17th. And our current schedule is set up for that. We have identified that we would go to the Local Government Commission at their meeting on February 7th if you all decide you want to move forward. So the Local Government Commission would approve on February 7th, and that would leave us a week and a half to close after that, which is pretty normal. Okay? You also, just in the interim there, December 20th, you have a public hearing that's been scheduled on this financing. And that would also be where you would approve a resolution for the financing. So what we're looking for today is direction on the funding. Come back on December 20th, hold a public hearing. You'll approve or consider approving a resolution that the bond attorneys and your county attorneys will have drafted. And if all of that were to take place, we would go to the Local Government Commission on February 7th and be able to close by mid-February, which would meet the deadline, particularly as laid out by Truist. You can see on line 5, escrow project fund. This is getting into what do you do with the money when the loan closes. Most banks want you to hold the money with them, and it will earn interest. You'll keep the interest that it earns, and you'll just pull down and requisition the dollars as you have invoices that you need to pay to contractors.
Little clarification there. You're saying the entire amount is going to be put into an account.
Correct.
They're charging us 3% interest, but they're going to give us 0.5% interest.
Maybe a little more than 0.5%. Each bank will be a little different. It's better than it used to be, but it's not going to be equal to the borrowing rate at this point. I don't know that I have.
So have we got that broke down between all the banks? The interest?
I don't know that I have the interest rate from the banks, but I can get that before we wrap up.
Could that be a negotiable?
Not usually. It's whatever they offer on their deposits.
If we're gonna borrow 40 plus million and we can't negotiate with them,
I mean, we can,
try.
yeah,
Okay.
we can try. But, the Capital Management Trust is earning a little over, it's about 3.6%. That's where a lot of local government money sits. But for this type of financing, the banks want to hold the funds and have you requisition it out, because the collateral on this loan is the facility, but while it's being built, there's no facility. So they want to have control over those funds,
Keyword control.
because there is no facility to
Go against collateral.
foreclose on, if you will,
But I would think-
during the construction period.
I would think 3% will be better for them to possibly earn on 42 million than zero if we were to negotiate with them on our deposits.
Yeah, and it's not static, so it does, whatever it might earn when the loan closes. I mean, if rates continue to rise, then there may be an opportunity to improve on that. But before we finish up, I'll try to get the interest rate on the deposits. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
They all have bank fees of one sort or another, mostly to cover their cost of counsel, so the attorneys that would represent them in the closing. Credit approval, both JP Morgan and TD are subject to final credit approval, which, they usually don't submit proposals like this if they don't feel good about the credit approval process, but technically they've got to go through another step, whereas Truist has it fully approved. Line 8 is the attorneys that would represent the banks. These are all attorneys that we're familiar with that these banks typically use. And then on line 9, there's other considerations. This is where we get into any other unique terms and conditions that they might require. We get into real estate related requirements, because again, what's securing this loan is a deed of trust on the facility, and so the question, each bank looks at that differently. Do they want a survey? Do they want environmental work done on the site? Do they want title searches, title opinions, things of that nature? A couple of things to note under TD Bank. One of the things that was unique to them is towards the bottom of Section 9, they have tied to this loan, and we asked them to remove it. They said they couldn't, a provision where if the county's bond rating for its general obligation debt was downgraded below a Baa1 or BBB level, which would be a fairly significant downgrade from where you're currently rated, but this could be a 20-year loan. If you were downgraded by either Moody's, S&P, or Fitch, that would constitute an event of default. So they would not remove that. And that's a situation, albeit maybe unlikely, that your rating would fall to that level. There may be things over the course of the next 20 years that you have more limited control over, and that were to happen, and if that were to happen, presumably it's happening because of things out of your control, and that's probably the time where you could least afford a default situation that would mean they would accelerate the loan payback. They would not remove that provision. Again, you might say it's unlikely that we would fall to that level of a bond rating, but you just don't know. So that was something worth noting. TD has a little bit more real estate related work that they would want. I don't think any of it is too onerous, but it will require a little bit of time and expense, particularly if we need the title report or a title opinion. Whereas Truist, they didn't really have any terms and conditions that would be considered out of the ordinary, anything that we wouldn't have already approved, having done loans with them already. And their real estate related work is pretty minimal. They pull a flood insurance. They don't require title insurance, title opinion, nor survey. Okay? So pretty straightforward in that regard. So we've got interest rates, right? We've got other terms and conditions, and sort of cut to the chase in talking with staff on the bank financing. We have put a recommendation in here that we move forward with Truist for all of those reasons. While they may not be the absolute lowest rate, they are a fixed rate. We don't have to lock it in through some other mechanism like we do with TD Bank, because remember, TD Bank is floating, and they have what we would consider to be pretty standard prepayment language and no other terms and conditions in their loan that would be considered out of the ordinary.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Do you think that since we're already banking with Truist, that played into them being a little more lenient?
I think this is just, I think none of these proposals surprise me. JP Morgan, TD Bank, and other banks just have a little bit more of a multi-step process where they give you a rate indication, but they don't want to lock the rate unless they know you're moving forward with them. Truist typically just has a very clean proposal, and so I think they obviously they're comfortable with the county as a credit. They were even willing to approve us up to a higher amount if you all had decided to approve the base bid and all the alternates. Truist was willing to go to a higher loan amount, but I think they also just have determined their own methodology is to try to keep these very clean and very simple, and that's how they have historically put their proposals together. And I think they also look at this project as a very essential project. It's a good piece of collateral. It's a safe loan, if you will, not only because Wayne County they know is strong, but this is an asset that you really can't function without. And so the likelihood that you all would not appropriate the debt service in your budget is very, very low. And I think all of that played into their proposal. Okay? So I did want to give a little perspective on the financing options and the payments. So this page 4 is where we're modeling up the base project costs, and you can see that on line 18. It says project fund. In all of these scenarios, these are set up to provide the county with $41,718,500. Every one of these is solving for that same funding to be available at closing, $41,718,500. We've included cost of issuance that would be added to the loan, and we are looking at the annual and total payments for each option. So if you look under column B, that's the Truist proposal at the 3.79. You can see what the fiscal year payments are. Payments start in fiscal year 24 at about $3.6 million, and you can see they decline over time. The total payback over the life of the loan, if you never repay it or prepay it, refund it, is $58.4 million. We have TD Bank modeled up two ways. They had two options. One had an indicative rate of a 367. One had an indicative rate of a 362. You can see what those annual payments are over the same 20-year term, total payments, and what the difference is at the very bottom of columns C and D compared to Truist. Yes, sir.
Are we able to add our architectural fees into the amount that we borrow?
We've, in the 41,718,500, do we have that included?
We would not have included that. And so my question is, could we increase the amount that we're borrowing to include the $3.5 million in architect fees?
If they're not already in here, the bank is certainly willing to increase the loan amount if that's something you all would want to do.
Okay, and I think that's something that we might want to highly consider. Thank you.
And the number that has appeared in the notice of public hearing, I think we ended up at 55 million. So we've set a legal cap on the loan that's well above where I think we're headed. So if you determined you wanted to include some or all of that A&E fee, and it's not already in that 41.7, I think yes, the answer is yes, you could.
Okay, thank you.
How did we plan on paying the architect fee? What reserves or where was that money coming from? 3.5 million on
We either have
architect
to
fees?
finance it or pay it out of existing funds that we have.
It would either be pay-go or include it in the debt financing.
Well, I'm not gonna say it's my concern, but just something to think about. We're looking at a lot of money here for 20 years. We're putting a lot of burden on the future boards. 20-year note, probably won't any of us be on the board for 20 years. And I want to certainly borrow it enough to get the job done, but I want to try to keep it as conservative as we can too. I mean, just because we can borrow it, don't mean we have to borrow it. Now, we got to rely on staff to let us know, what we can pay up front and what we can't, like the architect fees and any other hidden cost.
Well, I don't think, just for what it's worth, I don't think you need to make that decision today as a
I just want to make sure it was an option.
Right, yeah, and if you want to keep that on the table as an option, I know the public hearing has been advertised in such a manner that will allow for it, and we just need to make sure that that resolution that would come before you all on December 20th provides that continued flexibility. But getting into the local government commission application process in early January, that's where we need a decision about, is that type of cost in or out? So you got a little bit of time to make that decision if you need it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Column E, we've been talking about bank financing here so far. Column E is what we call a public sale, which is another option you all could pursue for this project. And you've done a public issuance of bonds before. That's where you go and you get the bonds rated and you sell the bonds into the bond market. That is a viable option here. You can see that the rate on that as of late last week was around a 371. The key point on the public sale option is if you wanted to go that route, there are a number of things we need to get underway to facilitate that. We need to get, there's more documentation involved, the ratings, some other professionals involved, and you would not be able to lock the rate on that loan until mid-February.
Where are you at again?
Column E.
E, and you said the rate was what?
371, the top of E.
Okay, I see now.
So bank financing, for example, from Truist, we know they said, look, you're at 379, we're good to close that loan in mid-February. If you wanted to do a public sale, which you've done before, the current market estimate on that is a 371, but because of the way going to the bond market works and all the things you need to do, you would not be able to lock that rate until mid-February. So it's slightly better than Truist, but we've got 60 days or so before we can lock that rate.
What would be the advantage of it? I mean, I
I
don't see
mean,
that much.
on
difference in
paper
the bottom
here,
line.
it's a couple, it's what, $300,000? But the real risk is what do rates do between now and mid-February? If rates went down, you know, you would
That
do
ain't gonna
better,
happen.
but we don't know that. And we were pleasantly surprised, to be honest with you, at how close the Truist proposal was to the public sale. It kind of made that, I think, an easier decision to say, look, a bird in the hand with Truist or one of these banks, we've got the rate, and we don't need to go and do all these other things to get prepared to go to the market in February, and we're sort of at the mercy of the market between now and then.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a real meaningful
I don't think it is.
advantage. And in that bond market, you would typically have the first 10 years of the loan not prepayable. That's standard in the bond market.
These bank fees here, 10,000, 12,000, would they not negotiate some on these bank fees? I mean, why are the bank fees as high as they are? I mean,
They're
Basically paying lawyers.
paying lawyers that represent them on the reviewing the documents, the approvals, making sure, you know, everything is being put together appropriately. Maybe there's some real estate work that the bank attorneys need to do.
To be sure, the banks has got attorneys on staff as big as these banks are right here.
They say they've got somebody outside counsel that they've listed in this. Truist says anyhow.
Yeah, and you'll notice that, I mean, under the public sale approach, there are additional costs associated with that because you are bringing in some additional attorneys and underwriting firms. So that is a higher cost of issuance approach than the banks. But the bank fees that they've got here, I think, are pretty typical to what we see. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but they need representation, and they would all typically pass that on to the borrower.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, you said Truist over 20 years it would be 58 million,
Correct.
right? And TD Bank would be 57,955, correct?
Correct.
So going on across, when I get down to JP Morgan, over 20 years, that payback would be 52 million.
JP Morgan is only a 15-year term. They wouldn't go 20 years.
Okay,
So it's a shorter loan, and as a result, you don't pay as much interest, but you can see the annual payments go from something around $3.4 million a year up to almost $5 million a year. So it's just
I mean, I get
shorter.
it, but I'm just saying over time, either way, even with 15 years, you're shortening the loan, but you're still saving $6 million if we went to term. First with Truist, correct?
Yeah, if you did that shorter loan, yes, you would have savings, in this case, of almost $6.3 million. Now,
What would Truist do on a 15-year note?
I'm not sure they proposed that. I think actually we asked for a 20-year note, not 15. And when you look at the capital planning work we've done, when you look at this loan plus DSS, the 15-year loan
Stretches.
is a burden. It doesn't fit in the capital planning work. The 20-year term is what is needed for the overall plan. In a vacuum, yeah, you'd rather pay it off in 15 than 20. I certainly understand that, but in the bigger context of all the other things you've got going on, the 20-year is what I think is really necessary for the capital planning model. That includes DSS and all the other debt you have on the books.
I mean, I'm just looking at the payment schedule, like, so, I don't really have time to do all these numbers right now, but just looking at it in my head, it's like, even with the 15 years, it might be a little tighter window, but it just seems the better deal to me. I can't understand why Truist would be the better deal even with that, because you're looking at even several years. I mean, you're paying a little over $1 million in maybe $1,200,000 over on certain payments, but, I mean, it works its way out a lot better with the numbers to me. I mean, I'm not a numbers expert, but it just seems the better overall. And then you talking about future boards where none of us will probably even be here in 15 years, that this debt would be paid. You know, I think sometimes, you know, we're already putting ourselves in a situation, even building a jail this late, because it should have already been built at a cheaper cost. And then you're still turning around and you're adding where you could maybe pay a little more money. While we're here, we make it work and save that $6 million overall, so later on down the road, they don't have to worry about that payment. You know, so it's just something to think about. I mean, it's whatever the board decides, but I mean, looking at the numbers to me, the JP Morgan,
What's the 4 and the 3?
looks better overall.
Yeah, and it may be helpful if, in the sort of the context of that, if you want to look at page 8, because I think this is where you are able to see a little more than just this detention center borrowing. Page 8 in the lower right-hand corner, this is the...
Let me ask you a question before you get that far
Sure.
into it. Back to what Bevan's talking about on 4, at the top of JP Morgan, it's got a 4.0 and then it's got a 3.0. What is that, what is the payment schedule based on?
It's based on blended. The 4.0 is during, you got to go back to page 2 and read
Right.
the interest rates. There's an interest rate they would have during the construction phase of the loan, and then an interest payment they would have once the loan starts to amortize principal.
So which one's which? The 4% here?
4% is during what they call the availability period, when you are pulling money down to spend on the project. And then once the loan goes into paying the principal back, they're at the 315.
So those numbers are based off of the 3.15%?
It's 4% for the first couple of years, and then it's 3.15.
Okay. Let's go. I got 4%, 3.065. Is that what you're saying, the 3.1? Am I looking at that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. All right. So basically, okay, I got you. So you're saying the 4% is based off basically 2 years worth of construction
During the
thereabouts, 18
construction.
months. And then after that, it's going to go to the 3.0 or 3.1.
Right.
Right. Now, you got to go back and read under page 2, under column B, the approach that they have to setting those interest rates. So you can read there, they've got for the first 24 months of the loan will be in the form of a non-revolving drawdown credit, meaning you pull the money down for project costs. They call that the availability period. And after this period, all remaining balances will be drawn and convert to a term loan. That's a loan that starts to amortize.
So it's basically like a construction loan on a house, and then after you closed or get finished, you just start on the
Right. And during the availability period, loans will be interest only and bear a variable rate, not a fixed rate, a variable rate according to a calculation that they've included here
So you're saying it's going to be a variable rate after the fact?
during the construction drawdown.
Okay.
During what they call the availability period,
Right.
it will be interest only and bear a variable interest rate. And then the
Variable
term
rate of 4.0.
That's right. And then the term loan will bear interest at a rate fixed, determined at the closing date, and it will be set according to an index as well.
So in 2 years, if the interest rates goes out the roof, is it based on the current?
I think with JP Morgan, you had the choice of setting that amortizing rate sooner, but through what they call a forward agreement, or waiting until that period, the construction period ends, and then setting it.
So a gamble.
So you've got some exposure there.
Right.
Bank fees are $40,000 versus 10.
Yeah, so, I mean, but I'm saying that they've locked this in at 4 and 3 as of right now, right?
It's not locked, but that's what it would be if you were able to lock it now.
Okay, it's no different than anybody else, right? Across the board, that's no different than any other bank, correct? And you're saying the four is the draw, because every bank you gotta draw from, they're gonna keep the money and you gotta basically make it, that's every bank. It's no difference. It may sound different on paper, but it's still the exact same thing. Even with the $40,000 fees, it still come out cheaper. I mean, I'd rather pay $40,000 in fees and save $6 million than to pay $10,000 in fees and pay you $6 million over the term. I mean, it just doesn't make sense at the end of the day to me. I mean, that's all I'm saying. We can come up and we can talk about it all day and language and everything with variables and all that. But right now, according to it, it's 4 and it's locked in at 4 and 3 something. I mean, no different than anybody else. Anybody else, it's the same thing across the board for all the banks. But when you're looking at it right now, it's the best deal. May not like the deal, but it's just the best deal.
So when you follow up later and ask them about the rate that we can possibly get, can you see if Truist is willing to do the same thing, a 15-year term? Because I'm sure they're not going to want to lose this. See if they want to do a 15-year term with comparable numbers that Commissioner Foster just stated, and give us some feedback.
Yeah, we'd be happy to bring that back. I think we do need to look, though, at some other subsequent slides, because, I mean, just take it to your own personal finances. I mean, if you get a mortgage, I think generally speaking, you'd rather have a 15-year mortgage if you can afford it. But circumstances may be that you need to pay that mortgage back over 30 years because you can't afford the payment. So I think that's kind of where we're getting to here on the 15 versus 20. And in the county's case, it's not just one mortgage. You got another mortgage coming for DSS and future mortgages coming for other projects. And that's why I was suggesting if we could spend a minute on page 8, just make sure that everybody's got the perspective of how this particular loan fits into the bigger picture of the county's capital program. And what you've got on page 8 is the base bid of funding $41.7 million through Truist. And if you look at this, I know there's a lot of numbers, but this is the comprehensive plan. And if you look on the left-hand side under column B, that's the debt you got on the books today. You're already obligated to make those payments under B. The green column C is the debt we're talking about, and it's modeled up according to Truist. Column D is the debt we are expecting to take on for the DSS facility under a $32 million project cost for that project, column D. So that has not been put in place. We're expecting maybe that gets put in place this spring or summer. We're using a $32 million project cost for that, but obviously it's not been bid. But that's not in place, but I think you're headed in that direction to put it in place. Column E is some one-time pay-go capital that you've got in the model. Column F is a continuation of annual pay-go capital that you are funding various projects out of, fleet, vehicles, IT, things like that. And you can see those under F, G, and H. Those are all expected continued investments in various types of capital projects. So what you end up with is column K, where all of that debt and all of that pay-go is summed up. And you can see that the payments are going from what is about $9.6 million up to as high as $17 million, and then they start to step back down. So when we're talking about this loan, if we were to try to amortize this loan over 15 years rather than 20, it's just going to push those payments higher sooner. And what you're going to see as you get over to the far right is we've got various sources of funding that are identified to repay all of these projects. There's revenues under column L, there's a DSS reimbursement we would get when that project comes online, and you've got a capital reserve fund over under column U. What you're going to see, though, is column U gets down to about $2.8 million. It doesn't go to zero, but it gets to about $2.8 million. If we were to try to finance this project over 15 years, I think what we might find is that column U goes to zero or below, and it would mean that you've got to come up with some other dollars to put into this plan. So in a vacuum, I think paying this back over 15 years is better than paying it back over 20 years. It's just a question of, are we comfortable that we can take the shorter payment and make it work within this plan? And we're happy to ask Truist for a 15-year rate if that would be helpful and run that through here. But I just want to make sure in that discussion, we understand there's a bigger picture analysis that I want to make sure we're taking into account when we make that decision.
We're looking at 2034. I think that's the year. I could be wrong, but somewhere up in there, we're saying it get down to 2.8 million.
Correct.
The difference would be 1.2 million on the difference between the loan payment between Truist and JP Morgan.
But it's 1.2, not just once, it's for several years.
Yeah, but I'm just saying still, it's not going to bring us down to zero is what I'm saying overall. But what I'm saying still in the long run, we're talking, this county's not going to close. You're talking about long haul. That 6 million just looks way more attractive, you know what I mean, and whatnot at the end of the day. And yes, we do have other things we have to fund, but I mean, we're looking at these 20-year loans, and what we're paying back is a lot. I mean, you're borrowing 42, you're paying back 58. That's $16 million. If you can, I mean, at 15 years, that's 10 million. So interest. So I mean, it's just a big difference. And I think, we've been doing business with Truist, but at the same time, I mean, if there are other options out here that might be better, we need to start taking advantage of those. I mean, we've been doing things one way for the longest. At some point, you have to start looking at things different in order to accomplish something different. That's just the way life goes.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we're happy to bring back an alternative Truist proposal if that would be of interest. And we're not going to lose any time in doing that. I'm sorry we don't have that to present today.
I think that'll give us some, to look at each other, to compare, just to.
That would be fine, yeah. And we can plan on having that for the December 20th discussion. Again, it won't impact the public hearing because that doesn't get specific about a bank or a term. And the preliminary findings resolution that you would consider on December 20th, we can just be sure that that's written in such a way that gives us the latitude, because you will have one final approval on February 7th. The LGC meets on the 7th, but you all meet on the 7th as well. It's a two-step approval process for you all, December 20th and February 7th. So we should be able to bring back for further discussion a few other options and address some of the other items that were brought up about the earnings rate during construction, things of that nature.
Do you think the LGC would have a problem with a 15-year versus a 20-year, because of the amounts of the money and the payment back?
I don't think so. I think they would say, are you comfortable taking on this higher annual payment in the context of everything else you need to do? And I think if you all say we are, and I think they would give you that latitude. They certainly won't let you go longer than 20. That's where they get more involved and concerned. But shorter, I think generally they wouldn't have a problem if you all are comfortable with it.
So, do you feel like we've given you the direction you need at this moment?
I think you have. So we're gonna get 15-year proposals from a few of these banks. Truist, I think we would offer it to Webster as well if they're like to give us a 15-year rate, so that we have something more comparable to measure against JP Morgan. We'll clarify the interest earnings rate during construction on the deposit. We'll ask them if they'd be willing to revisit the bank fees that they have included in their proposal
And the prepayment penalty.
and the prepayment language, prepayment penalty.
Yeah, because we go to a 15-year note, we want the prepayment back down as well. I mean, we wanted it 10 years, like it is.
Yeah, no, I think when you go to the banks for a 15-year loan, they will re-examine the prepayment period, may or may not change the 1% penalty. But so, for example, what we would expect from Truist if you did a 15-year loan is they'd say for the first 7.5 years, you can prepay it with a 1% penalty, and for the second 7.5 years, you can prepay it with 0 penalty. But we'll ask them if they consider something else less penalizing.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
I look forward to seeing those numbers, but I caution us not to lock in at a higher rate without knowing what the bids are on the DSS Health Department and what we have moving forward. So we just have to be cautious here that we don't lock ourselves into where we have to go beyond the 4.4 cent property tax increase that we passed to actually fund this program. We just have to be very careful.
I agree.
And
Okay.
our workforce costs are gonna keep
Yeah.
rising as well.
Correct.
Okay, I do think I have the direction, and again,
Do you think you can have all this together by our next meeting?
yes, that won't be a problem.
Okay, all right.
We will have it all together, and we'll update a few of these slides where it's appropriate, and it should not have any impact on our schedule. Anything else related to that?
We appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your patience on
Oh,
it.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that means we will see him on the 20th.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Mr. Crumpler, we have closed session. Do we?
We don't have anything for closed session today.
Okay. Is that all we
can
have?
adjourn, yes.
Okay.
You want to bring us a little update on the parade at O'Berry Thursday? Just the information, so everybody wants to.
Do you know the information?
It's at,
Chris probably.
Yes,
It's
it's-
at 1:30,
it's, yeah,
and the parade begins at 2.
and I got the, I think she sent that stuff to me yesterday, yeah. I'll forward it to everybody. The actual, parade, the lineup and all the, it's supposed to rain, but now we can't, we won't be interacting with the, residents because they've had some COVID issues and they're kind of protective over trying to get them to, I'll forward that to everybody.
Weather's permitting, you know, this would, of all the parades, this would be the priority on my list, because this is, the clients out there are, they're special people, you know. Like I had said in the previous meetings, we used to have a parade out there several years ago until COVID came along. And, it's, this one will tug at your heartstrings.
You should have it now.
And I think also is the veterans replaying this Saturday? Information?
I don't have that.
Yes, the 17th is Wreaths Across America, and they're planning on having a large turnout at the Veteran Cemetery. Bill Graham did call me and wanted to know was I going to be there, but I hope everyone understands. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he's buried in Pikeville, and I feel like that's where I need to be for that ceremony. But if some of the rest of you could go to the Veteran Cemetery, it would speak highly for the county.
I'll be there with you. Does anyone else have anything on the board before I adjourn?
Madam Chair, there is one matter that I would ask Allison if she could possibly, is Allison not here? Well, good, we can definitely task her with her not being here. One of the things that will affect this decision coming up next Tuesday is the savings on personnel that we would have in operating the new jail. Because that affects our budget and whether or not we have the dollars available to make higher payments. We have not been able to get that number, and I am asking that we get that number for this board for next Tuesday.
They've sent us that number before. What's the guy's
Well,
name?
and it may be that we do have it, but if we could get it back out to the board members so that we can see what that number is, because that does have an effect. So I would just ask that we get that.
That's a good point, Commissioner Doctor, it really is. Because it could be up in $1 million towards the difference in the 15-year loan
It
that
could be.
Commissioner Foster was talking about.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, just in case we run into change orders on the jail. Is that, when we're saying we're locked into 41.7 something, if we run into a significant amount of change orders, which I'm hoping we won't, but you know how a project this size comes up, is it permissible for us to go back and borrow more money, or we got to pay that out of pocket, or how does that work?
The typical structure with this would be you get what you get when you close. If you need more, we can go back to them and add to it, but it would be like closing another loan.
Right, gotcha, okay.
You wouldn't have to go back to the LGC if you went back with you.
I
Because you're
think you
increasing.
probably
Yeah, I
would,
think
because
you
you're
would.
increasing the loan amount.
Okay.
Anything that you change from what they approve of, you would
Yeah.
have to go back.
Even though the way we've got it worked for the 50, up to 55, as far as the public hearing, we're still.
You still have other
Got it.
limitations to just adding it with the bank. I don't think the bank would have a problem, but legally, we've got to do a few different things.
Got it.
And when you rework those numbers, let's add in the architectural fees, if you do it separately or whatever.
Okay.
We need to
Right.
know because, in my opinion, we would need to borrow the cost. I'm kind of looking at it this way. Right now, with interest rates as they are, and everybody knows they're going to go up. I mean, they're already projecting at least 0.75% more. So we already know that when we come around to borrowing for the DSS Health Department, those interest rates are going to be higher. So it's more to our benefit to borrow what we can at the lower rate on the jail and borrow less on the DSS Health. That's kind of the way I'm looking at it. If I were doing it and structuring it from my company, that's the way I would do it. Because we're gonna have to borrow money on two pots. Well, I'd rather borrow more on the front end and less on the back end because the interest rate's gonna be higher on the back end. So that's kind of what I'm
Would that be a bargaining tool, with the banks, knowing that we got another project coming?
Generally not.
Of course, we need the money, they got it.
Yeah. Holding the purse.
$50 million to these banks is
chump
pocket
change, right?
change.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, and we do get a point with some banks. I don't think it's the case with the banks we've been talking about, where they have a certain amount of loans outstanding with any one entity, even if it's a county, and say, that's all the exposure we'd like to have to this particular borrower. So I don't think you'll have any real leverage to say, can you give us better rates here? Now, I do think there's some things that, and Mitch, my colleague, who you all know, was back and forth with SunTrust as we were going. So there's some things I think that are moving in the right direction, and we'll have all of that buttoned up and ready to share next Tuesday.
with who? Is it SunTrust?
Truist, sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Was shocked that SunTrust did not put in a bid on it.
Well, that is BB&T, SunTrust
That's right.
merge.
It is.
So they
All of them become merging together.
That's right. So, I mean,
Let's
in
get
theory, there's
something close.
one less bank
Let's
that was
clarify
bidding.
something. When the name changes, there was not a merger. There was a buyout. Went through it twice.
All right, we good.
Okay.
Good?
Okay, thank you.
So meetings are.
Anything else? All right, meeting closed. Thank you, guys.